Over the past few weeks, we heard about King Herod, who ruled Judea for the Romans and built great works like the expanded temple in Jerusalem, the new city of Caesarea on the Mediterranean coast, and the winter palace and fortress of Masada by the Dead Sea. We also met two great teachers and leaders, Hillel, who came from the Babylonian Jewish community, and Shammai, who was born in Judea. Hillel and Shammai worked together and led the community through the time when Jesus was also teaching and preaching the Jewish traditions in the Galilee and in Jerusalem. When a non-Jew asked that the Torah be explained to him while he stood on one foot, Shammai sent him away, but Hillel accepted the challenge and said, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow." That is the whole Torah. The rest is the explanation. Now go and learn. What is hateful to you, do not do to others, is known as the Golden Rule. It's every bit as useful and relevant now as it was then 2,000 years ago. The Talmud teaches us, let a person always be humble and patient like Hillel and not short-tempered like Shammai. As we've seen, Hillel was prepared to adjust the Torah and the laws to suit the needs and situation of the community of the time. But Shammai felt you should be as strict as possible in observing all the rules of the Torah. Though each of them had a different approach and a different set of rules to interpret Torah, there are only three things recorded that Hillel and Shammai themselves were said to disagree about. However, each of them started colleges with many students in each, learning their different interpretations and approaches to the Torah. The colleges were known as Bet Hillel, the house of Hillel, and Bet Shammai, the house of Shammai. Over the generations, the students and disciples of Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai argued and disagreed on over 300 things. But they did it in the interest of trying to work out what God really wanted us to do. We are taught that even though they had so many disagreements, still they ate in each other's houses and their children married each other. In other words, they still recognized each other as Jews. Sadly, today, some Orthodox people will not allow their children to marry some progressive people or eat in their houses, because they say they and their rabbis do not follow the rules and are not properly Jewish. In almost all their disagreements, the house of Shammai was more strict and the house of Hillel was more lenient. And in almost all cases, the tradition follows the more lenient ruling of the house of Hillel. So there are things we still do today, 2,000 years later, as a result of the often heated debates between the two schools. For example, Bet Shammai said on Hanukkah, you should start with all the lights of the menorah burning and reduce by one candle every night. But Bet Hillel said we should add to the celebration with one extra candle each night, which is what everyone now does. From the many recorded disagreements between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, we are taught that the differences between Hillel and Shammai were for the sake of heaven, trying to work out with the best of intentions what God wants from us. Hillel and Shammai helped to formalize what we now know as Rabbinic Judaism. But of course, they and the rabbis who came after them were very familiar with the stories of the Torah and the whole Jewish Bible. Indeed, it was they who decided what works would be included in the Jewish Bible and what would be omitted, resulting in the Hebrew Bible that we have today. Around June, a few weeks into reading the book of Numbers in the weekly Torah portion, we come across Parshat Korach. Korach is a priest who, with over 250 followers, rises up against Moses and his leadership of the Israelites in the desert. In the end, according to the story, which may well record a sinkhole in this earthquake-prone region, the ground opens up and swallows Korach and his family alive. This is supposed to teach the people that God is with Moses and they should never risk questioning his authority again. The Talmud uses this story to teach that there are two sorts of disagreements. Jews, after all, are very good at arguing, which might be why there are so many Jewish lawyers. The two sorts of arguments are those for the sake of power, pride, arrogance, and defiance, like Korach, and those like Hillel and Shammai, which are called machloket l'shem shamayim, disagreements for the sake of heaven, trying to genuinely discover the right thing or what God wants us to do. And one of the things we learn about good debating is to put the position of the other side respectfully before you put your own side. We're even taught that both can be right, even if we decided to follow one or the other. This is expressed as Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chayim. Both are the words of the living God. In other words, God is brought into our lives by these debates and arguments, trying to work out what God really requires of us. So the arguments and disagreements of Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai and the conclusions that emerged have become the bedrock of the Judaism that we still practice today, as well as the tradition of respectful debate and disagreement, which are inevitable parts of life.